Hi, I'm Dalvin Harris for Bad City Beat. Today we speak with author Bob Morris about his book, Built in Detroit, the story of the UAW, a company and a gangster.
Today's lecture is about my book, Built in Detroit, a story of the UAW, a company and a gangster.
Bob Morris, author of Built in Detroit, hosts presentations to tell the history of the Detroit automobile scene, as well as the history and struggles of the UAW.
UAW is the United Automobile Workers, founded in 1935, and one of the most important labor organizations this country has known.
The UAW is a North American union founded in 1935 with over 400,000 active members and over 500,000 retired members in the U.S., Canada, and Puerto Rico.
Well, the need was pretty simple. It was a question of workers not being paid a living wage, not receiving benefits, working in unsafe conditions, being treated essentially without dignity. And in 1935, President Roosevelt signed the National Labor Relations Act that gave workers the power to organize into a union and to negotiate with the company on wages, benefits, and that sort of thing. And so the UAW grew, and other unions grew, as workers became more empowered.
The UAW has also been actively involved in every civil rights movement legislative battle since the 1950s.
In the 30s, the violence was on picket lines, sometimes between company security, sometimes between police officers, such as the Detroit Police Department. But in time, the unions were able to work through those problems, develop relationships in many instances with employers. But in the 40s, many employers still wanted to weaken unions. If they could accept unions, they had to be weak unions. And so what we found is employers, basically hired mobsters to beat up people. One of them was my father, who was beaten nearly to death in an attack at his house. Another example is Walter Reuther, where there was an assassination attempt at his house while he was standing in his kitchen. Both men were able, and others were able to survive the attack and continue with their careers. I did most of my research down at Wayne State's Reuther Archives, which is a great facility. And at the time, a friend was there, retired Doug Frazier, former president of the UAW. So I was able to talk to him on a pretty regular basis. But I went through tons and tons of material at the archives, other libraries, a lot of time at the State of Michigan Library. But then I also interviewed people like Doug Frazier, Jane Briggs Hart, Walter Briggs's daughter, and then I interviewed Emil Mazy's son, Larry. The ones we talk about specifically are Walter Reuther, Emil Mazy. We talk about a guy named R.J. Thomas, who was the president of the UAW before Walter. We talk about Victor Reuther, Walter's brother, and Roy Reuther, Walter's brother. These are all special people, successful people. And a real important point here is these leaders in the UAW are leaders who were very, very young. They had responsibility of calling strikes when they're in their 20s. They were negotiating in their 20s.
Bob Morris's book, Built in Detroit, can be found on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, or purchased from his website at www.builtindetroit.net.
I want them to understand the struggle that working men and women had in Detroit, in the auto plants in the 1930s and 40s, and that struggle is still relevant today. That employers, even the progressive employers, don't just give things away. They do it for a reason. And in a world we're in today where someone might just move a factory from Detroit or Michigan to China or someplace else, that's a real issue. Employers and the union have to have a working relationship, and when they do and they work together, some really good things can happen.
Bob is also available to do presentations on his book, so if this story is one that sparks your interest, be sure to check his book out on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and BuiltInDetroit.net. For Bad City Beat, I'm Dalvin Harris.